Ancient medical practices that, somehow, worked. Welcome, traveler of time. Tonight, on Nocturnal Historian, we'll drift through the dim corridors of ancient healing, where trepanation eased pressure in aching skulls, honey soothed wounded flesh, and wine was poured not into goblets, but onto wounds. From Egyptian temples to Mayan jungles, Chinese apothecaries to Roman field camps, we'll explore the strange, the sacred, and the surprisingly effective remedies that shaped how our ancestors understood the body, and the spirit. These stories are soft but true. Sometimes eerie, sometimes oddly beautiful. So whether you're winding down for sleep, or simply love a good whisper from the past, you're in the right place. As you listen, I'd love to know. What part of tonight's journey stays with you the most? And where in the world are you listening from? Share with us in the comments. Let's make this quiet little corner of the internet a circle of curious minds. Long before hospitals had beeping machines, stainless steel, and sterile gloves, healing was an art of faith, instinct, and often, desperation. In a world without germ theory or anesthesia, people turned to whatever they could find. Stones, smoke, honey, blood, wine. Sometimes mixed in ways that sound almost mythical now. And strangely, some of it worked. Tonight, let's dim the lights and sink into the past. Into forgotten temples, desert tombs, candlelit chambers, places where pain was constant, and healing meant ritual, risk, and intuition. This is the story of ancient medicine, its wonders, its horrors, and the odd beauty of what the human mind can discover when it's trying to survive. Let's start with something that might make your scalp tingle. Trepanation. The act of drilling a hole directly into the skull. It's one of the oldest known surgical practices in human history. Archaeologists have found trepanned skulls from every corner of the ancient world, Peru, France, Russia, Polynesia. Some dating back more than 7,000 years. And they weren't isolated cases. Entire burial sites full of skulls with perfectly rounded holes, clean, deliberate, and in many cases, healed. That's the part that stops people, healed bone. That means the person survived. Why would someone do this? The reasons varied by culture. In the Andes, it may have been to treat head trauma, blow to the head in battle, swelling, seizures. In some African regions, it was spiritual, releasing evil spirits, or balancing energies trapped inside the skull. In medieval Europe, even into the Renaissance, trepanation was practiced to relieve pressure, or cure madness. The tools evolved, from sharp rocks to bronze blades. But the goal remained eerily the same: release what doesn't belong. Modern scientists have debated it for decades. Could they have really been that precise? Could a person survive that kind of procedure in the dirt floor world of 5000 BC? The answer is, yes, with shocking frequency. X-rays and forensic tests show signs of bone regrowth, meaning patients lived weeks, months, maybe years after the procedure. Some even had multiple holes, which meant they underwent the operation more than once. It was not done in ignorance. It was practiced, tested, and passed down across generations. How they avoided infection, we still don't fully understand. Some speculate they used natural antiseptics, like honey, or wine. Which leads us to our next point. What's fascinating is that ancient people didn't need microscopes to learn what worked. Trial, error, and observation taught them more than we give them credit for. Take honey, for example. The Egyptians used it to treat wounds over 3,000 years ago. They would pack deep gashes with honey and wrap it tightly with linen. Today, we know honey contains hydrogen peroxide and has natural antibacterial properties. But they didn't need lab results. They just saw that wounds treated with honey were less likely to rot. The Ebers Papyrus, an Egyptian medical scroll written around 1550 BCE, mentions honey over 500 times, for everything from eye infections to burns. And modern medicine still uses medical-grade honey in certain treatments today. In fact, Some hospitals use manuka honey dressings on wounds that resist antibiotics. It's easy to laugh at the ancients. To imagine superstition, leeches, and smudges of dirt on feverish foreheads. But when you peel back the layers, you see something else. A kind of primitive brilliance. These weren't just rituals, they were early science, cloaked in myth, colored by religion, and sharpened by necessity. So tonight, we begin our quiet journey through the ancient world's most bizarre, and strangely effective, healing techniques. From skulls with holes, to honey in battlefields, to what the Mayans did with obsidian blades, and how the Chinese balanced energy with needles. And somehow, when the night is quiet and the candles low, it all begins to feel, not so far away. There's something humbling about realizing that over 1,000 years before the first stethoscope was ever pressed to a chest, ancient hands were already suturing wounds, setting bones, and trying, earnestly, to ease the suffering of others. One of the most advanced examples of this comes from ancient Egypt. To many, Egypt means pyramids, pharaohs, and golden tombs, but within those tombs, and on the crumbling walls of temples, are hints of a rich and methodical medical system. The Egyptians even had specialists, doctors who focused only on the stomach, the eyes, or even dentistry. They understood that the body had systems, and that illness might stem from blockages, imbalances, or poisons. Their word for doctor was SWNW. And while much of their treatment involved prayer and magic, their practical remedies were often, startlingly effective. One of the most curious was their use of moldy bread on wounds. Yes, mold. In the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a medical text dated around 1600 BCE, there are references to placing moldy bread over infected injuries. They didn't understand bacteria. They couldn't see spores or cells. But they had seen that certain types of spoiled bread helped wounds close faster, without the smell or rot that followed untreated gashes. Today, we know that some molds produce natural antibiotics, penicillin being the most famous, though it wouldn't be discovered formally until 1928. But there it was, 3,000 years before, a healer placing a scrap of damp, moldy grain on a soldier's wound, watching the fever subside. And the patient, perhaps, sleeping easier under the desert sky. Far across the ancient world, in the valleys and mountains of what we now call China, another tradition was unfolding, just as ancient, but entirely different in tone. Here, medicine was not just a response to injury, it was a philosophy. The Chinese saw the body as an ecosystem. An energy field. Illness was a blockage or imbalance in the flow of qi, the life force. Their doctors didn't just look at the wound, or the fever, or the cough, they looked at the rhythm of the patient. How they moved. How they breathed. What their tongue looked like beneath the lantern light. And one of their most famous contributions to the world of healing, was the needle. Acupuncture. It likely began around 2,500 years ago, though some say its roots stretch even further back. Bronze or bone needles were inserted at key points in the body. Not randomly, but with deep precision, following the meridians mapped by centuries of trial and tradition. To modern ears, it may sound like placebo. But many studies have now shown that acupuncture can reduce certain types of pain, inflammation, and nausea. It can activate nerve endings, release endorphins, even calm an anxious mind. Imagine lying on a bamboo mat, eyes closed. A healer sits beside you, murmuring softly. Outside, cicadas drone in the trees. Inside, the needle slips in. Silent, near painless. It doesn't cut. It listens. It balances. It soothes. There's no rush in ancient medicine. No machines, no white noise of beeping monitors. Only the quiet conversation between healer and body, between belief and biology. Some of these practices have stood the test of time. Others have faded, or been transformed into ritual, memory, and folklore. But even in silence, they whisper something true, that healing, in its oldest form, was an act of care. of attention, of human closeness in the face of mystery. And tonight, as we drift deeper into the forgotten chambers of medical history, the voices of those early healers are still there, waiting to be remembered. Let us move now to the quiet jungle clearings of ancient Central America. Among the Maya, medicine was something sacred. It was a blend of nature, spirit, and skill, passed through generations by word and by touch. The Mayan people believed that health was a balance between the body, the soul, and the unseen world. When one part was disrupted, illness followed. To heal, a practitioner might use herbs, prayers, rituals, or in some cases, a surgical tool made from volcanic glass. Obsidian. Smooth, dark, and sharper than any modern metal. Obsidian blades, when fractured correctly, can form an edge so fine that even today, some surgeons have studied their use for ultra-precise cuts. These ancient blades were used to lance abscesses, drain infections, and in more ceremonial work, to draw blood for spiritual healing. Despite the lack of antiseptic or anesthesia, Mayan healers operated with astonishing control. They made careful incisions, cleaned wounds with herbal poultices, and wrapped them in plant fibers soaked in sap or crushed bark. Some of the plants they used, we now know, had natural antibacterial or anti-inflammatory properties. One such plant was copal, a resin burned during rituals but also applied directly to the skin. It helped reduce swelling and fight infection. Another was tobacco, used not only for smoking but ground into pastes for its antiseptic qualities. Many Mayan remedies weren't just medicinal. They were deeply spiritual. A healer might ask the patient to confess a secret, or offer a small carving to the gods, believing that emotional and physical pain were entwined. It's easy to imagine the scene. A forest clearing. The air still and humid. The healer kneels over the patient, carefully drawing out infection with a glinting piece of glass. A bowl of herbs steams beside them. In the trees, birds call softly. There is no panic, no machines, only the careful rhythm of breath and belief. Far to the north, across oceans and time, another kind of medicine was forming. The ancient Greeks approached healing as both science and philosophy. For them, health was about balance. Not just of spirit, but of physical humors inside the body. They believed there were four: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. When these were in harmony, the body was well. When they were out of sync, illness appeared. One Greek physician, Hippocrates, is often called the father of modern medicine. He taught that illness wasn't a punishment from the gods, but the result of natural causes. He wrote that fresh air, rest, clean water, and a proper diet could heal most ailments. It was a radical idea at the time. Hippocrates and his followers also practiced bloodletting, something that would later become widespread and, in some cases, harmful. But their understanding of clinical observation, watching the patient carefully, recording symptoms, treating with moderation, was ahead of its time. They used garlic for infections, willow bark for pain, and vinegar for cleansing wounds. And in certain cases, they used wine. Not to drink, but to pour directly over wounds. The alcohol in wine acted as a disinfectant, reducing the chances of infection. It stung, yes, but it worked. Soldiers returning from battle might be treated this way, washed in wine, bandaged in linen, and left to rest in the cool shade of the temple. In each of these cultures, medicine was more than function. It was ritual, memory, story. It carried the scent of soil and steam, the flicker of firelight, the hush of voices speaking wisdom passed from one healer's hand to the next. And through it all, even now, we carry echoes of their work. In the quiet corners of ancient India, healing was not only practiced, it was woven into the very philosophy of life. The traditional system of Ayurveda, still practiced today, traces its origins back more than 3,000 years. Its name means, the science of life, and its goal was not just to treat disease but to live in harmony with the body, the seasons, and the spirit. Ayurvedic practitioners believed in three fundamental energies, or dashas: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. These energies were thought to shape everything from a person's personality to their digestion and response to illness. Treatment was personalized. The healer did not simply ask what hurt. They looked at how the person walked, spoke, even how they slept. From this, a prescription might be offered, a combination of herbs, oils, and rituals. Turmeric was used for wounds and inflammation. Ashwagandha to ease anxiety and fatigue. They bathed their patients in sesame oil, believing it could draw out heat and toxins from the body. And many of their treatments focused not on immediate relief, but long-term balance. One of their more curious practices involved nasya, the art of pouring medicated oil gently into the nose. It was believed to cleanse the mind, clear sinuses, and relieve headaches. The process was slow and careful. The patient would lie back, eyes closed, as warm oil was dripped slowly into each nostril. It might sound unusual, but many who've experienced it today describe a strange sense of calm afterward, like the body has been recentered. Ayurveda also emphasized fasting, gentle movement, and the connection between digestion and mood. While some of the science behind it has evolved, the guiding principle remains surprisingly modern. That health isn't only about fixing what's broken, but nourishing what keeps us whole. Across the sea, in the dense forests and mountains of what is now South America, ancient healers worked with plants so powerful that even modern pharmaceutical companies continue to study them. Many of these healers, often called curanderos or shamans, did not separate physical healing from spiritual connection. They used powerful herbs and roots, not just to treat illness, but to unlock visions, release grief, and restore inner harmony. One of the plants they prized most was quina, the bark of the cinchona tree. Indigenous people of the Andes had long used it to treat fevers. It would be hundreds of years before European colonists realized this bark contained quinine, which would become the first known treatment for malaria. And then there was ayahuasca. A powerful brew used not for physical wounds, but for healing the inner self. It was taken in ritual, under supervision, with the belief that illness could root itself in the soul, and that to heal fully, one needed to face what lay hidden. But not all their remedies were spiritual. They used clay to pull infection from wounds, ants to pinch wounds shut when thread was scarce, and bark poultices mixed with oils to treat bites and swelling. Their methods may seem strange, but in many cases, they worked, because they were built on generations of experience, observation, and deep respect for the natural world. What these traditions have in common is something simple but profound. They took time. They listened. The healer did not rush. There was no cold exam table or sterile mask. There was firelight, quiet, touch. The body was seen as part of something larger, woven into earth, spirit, breath, and memory. And in the hush of night, with only the sounds of wind or river or soft chanting, healing could begin. As we drift further into the quiet folds of history, we come upon the world of the indigenous North American tribes, where healing was deeply entwined with ceremony, story, and the rhythms of the land. Every tribe had its own customs, its own plant medicines, and its own sacred understanding of how to mend what was broken. In many traditions, there was no clear line between the body and the spirit. Illness might be caused by a wound, but it could also be the result of grief, imbalance, or forgetting one's place in the world. Healing, therefore, required more than herbs. It required song. It required smoke. It required presence. The Lakota, the Navajo, the Cherokee, and so many others each had their own medicine people. Wise elders who understood not only how to treat a fever, but how to listen for what could not be said. One practice shared by many tribes was the use of smudging, burning sacred herbs like sage, cedar, or sweetgrass to purify a space or a person. While we often think of this as symbolic, modern science has found that the smoke from some of these herbs may actually reduce airborne bacteria, acting as a kind of ancient air cleanser. In the physical realm, they used willow bark, chewed or brewed into tea, to treat pain and fever. Centuries later, chemists would isolate the active ingredient from this same plant and give it a new name, aspirin. They also used yarrow to stop bleeding, echinacea for infections, and juniper berries for digestive issues. These plants weren't chosen at random. They were tested, passed down, remembered. The knowledge was preserved in the form of spoken word, often sung or told as part of a story, making it easier to remember across generations. Imagine sitting by a fire as the healer explains what to gather in spring, what to chew when your bones ache, what roots to boil when the cough comes and doesn't leave. The knowledge isn't written. It's lived. And when night falls, and the fire crackles low, healing continues not with action, but with presence. A gentle touch. A steady voice. A prayer whispered not in desperation, but in trust. Further north, the Inuit people, living in the icy reaches of the Arctic, had to adapt their medicine to a world of extremes. There were no forests to gather herbs from. No fields of flowers. Instead, they used what the land gave them, seal fat, snow moss, whale oil, and the medicinal parts of rare tundra plants. They treated wounds with scraped moss soaked in oil. They used lichen, dried and ground, as antiseptic powder. And their greatest tool of all was knowledge, of what weather meant illness, of how to care for frostbite, of how to keep spirits strong through months of darkness. In such a harsh environment, emotional well-being was as vital as physical survival. The Inuit understood that isolation and fear could make a person sick. So they told stories. They carved images. They sang. They made meaning, even in the silence, because meaning itself can be medicine. As we lie still, listening, we begin to see a pattern, stretching across continents and millennia. Healing, in its truest form, is not always loud. It is not always fast. Sometimes, it is the act of sitting with another in pain, holding space, applying what the earth offers with care and intention. Even now, in our modern world, when we are hurt, we still crave the same things. Warmth, attention, safety, understanding. These are old needs, ancient as fire, and the remedies we seek are not always new. Sometimes, they're the echoes of footsteps on a forest trail, or the quiet chant of a healer under the moonlight. In the lands of the ancient Middle East, healing was both practical and poetic. Among the Sumerians, Babylonians, and later the Assyrians, illness was often seen as a disruption in the divine order. Yet their approach to medicine was not just prayer or punishment, it was deeply rooted in observation, ritual, and early records of diagnosis. From as early as 2000 BCE, clay tablets were etched with lists of symptoms and recommended treatments. These were not random guesses. They show a surprising level of detail, fever classifications, types of pain, even dietary instructions. Some of these tablets are the world's earliest medical texts. A healer, often referred to as an asapul, would combine incantations with salves, and rituals with herbal remedies. One such remedy was licorice root, used to soothe coughs and throat infections. We now know licorice contains compounds that reduce inflammation and act as mild antivirals. Another common ingredient was coriander, used for digestion. It's still used today in herbal teas and gut-soothing blends. Their mixtures also included myrrh, garlic, mint, and cumin. Spices that not only added flavor to food, but held medicinal value as well. The Babylonians also believed in diagnostic patterns. If the patient's pulse was weak, or their eyes yellowed, it meant something specific. These weren't myths. They were early attempts to map the body's signals and match them with treatment. Even the act of bathing was considered sacred and medicinal. Water, especially in combination with herbs or oils, was used to cleanse both the body and the spirit. In some temples, patients were brought into specially built healing baths, then wrapped in linen soaked in soothing mixtures of clay and oils. From the Middle East, we travel to the sun-washed lands of ancient Greece, where the ideas of the Egyptians and Babylonians were studied and refined. Greek medicine evolved into something resembling early science, though it still carried the beauty of metaphor. One prominent figure was Galen, a physician in the Roman Empire whose influence stretched for more than 1,000 years. He believed in the power of diet, rest, and exercise, and also practiced surgery with methods far ahead of his time. In treating wounds, Galen often used vinegar, not just as a cleaner, but to sterilize tools. He advised boiling surgical instruments, something that wouldn't become standard in Europe until centuries later. Galen wrote that wine, when heated and applied to wounds, helped prevent infection. It turns out he was right. Alcohol does kill bacteria, and his technique saved lives in crowded Roman camps where disease spread fast. Even more fascinating was Galen's understanding of the nervous system. Through careful dissection, he discovered that cutting certain nerves could lead to paralysis. Without modern tools, he mapped parts of the spine and brain with remarkable accuracy. Healers in ancient Greece and Rome also used clay, particularly a variety called terra sigillata, sacred clay tablets stamped with symbols. These clays, rich in minerals, were dissolved in water and taken for stomach issues, or applied to wounds to draw out poison. The minerals helped reduce swelling and provided mild antiseptic effects. Even into the 1800s, some clays were sold in pharmacies. It is remarkable to think that people, armed with little more than instinct and observation, were able to find healing in the earth itself, in the roots of a tree, the dust of a riverbank, the sharp tang of vinegar in a clay pot. They knew less, perhaps, but they saw more. They paid attention. And in doing so, they laid the foundation for the medicine we know today. Not far from the world of Galen and Hippocrates, another empire was building its own body of medical knowledge. Quietly, practically, and with deep discipline. The Romans, often remembered for their legions and laws, were also careful observers of the human body. Their soldiers marched not only with weapons, but with knowledge of wound care, field sanitation, and the art of keeping men alive far from home. In fact, much of Roman military dominance was supported by something surprisingly simple: clean water. The Roman aqueduct system, stretching for miles over hills and into cities, wasn't just an engineering marvel, it was a lifeline. Fresh water reduced the spread of disease, especially in densely packed cities like Rome. Public bathhouses, while social centers, also helped with hygiene, and most Roman citizens understood that cleanliness had a link, however vague, to health. Their doctors, known as medici, were often trained in both Greek and Roman traditions. In battle, they were expected to treat wounds quickly, using a range of tools made from bronze or iron, scalpels, forceps, hooks. These were boiled or treated with hot wine before being used. One tool, the speculum, used for examining body cavities, dates back to Roman times. Its design changed little over the centuries, a quiet reminder of how far their understanding reached. Roman healers also used spider webs to dress wounds. Thin, sticky, and rich in vitamin K, spider silk helped stop bleeding and formed a gentle mesh over cuts. It's a practice that might sound superstitious, but it actually worked. Even today, scientists study spider silk for potential use in bioengineered dressings. Their medicine chests also contained opium from the poppy plant, used to ease pain and induce sleep. While dangerous in large doses, small amounts were carefully measured and given during surgeries or in the treatment of long-term illnesses. Pain relief, even in ancient times, was seen as a mercy worth pursuing. As the Roman Empire declined, much of its medical knowledge was carried east, where it flourished under the hands of Arab and Persian physicians. In cities like Baghdad, medical schools and libraries preserved the works of Galen and added their own wisdom. One of the most brilliant minds of this era was Avicenna, a Persian scholar born in the 10th century. His book, The Canon of Medicine, became one of the most influential medical texts in the world, studied across Europe for hundreds of years. Avicenna believed in the healing power of nature. He catalogued hundreds of herbs, oils, and minerals, and described symptoms for diseases with astonishing accuracy. His understanding of contagion, the idea that some illnesses spread through invisible agents, was a precursor to germ theory. He also emphasized the importance of mental health. In a time when many cultures viewed mental illness as a curse or punishment, Avicenna treated it with compassion. He prescribed music, conversation, reading, and baths to soothe the mind. He understood that healing the body often began with calming the spirit. In these distant lands, under the desert stars or beside rivers of ink in ancient libraries, healing became something gentle, quiet, and exact. The physician's hands were steady, his tools clean, his mind sharp, and his heart attuned to the suffering of others. There were no electric lights, no antiseptic sprays, no humming machines. Only oil lamps, the scent of crushed herbs, and the soft rustle of parchment as notes were taken. Even now, centuries later, those hands still guide us. Not directly, but through the practices we inherit and the curiosity they awaken. As we continue through time, the shadows grow longer, and we enter the dim corridors of the medieval period, an age often painted as dark and unscientific. And yet, even in these years, between plague and prayer, medicine continued to evolve in ways both peculiar and profound. In medieval Europe, much of medical knowledge was preserved in monasteries. Monks became healers not only of the soul, but of the body. Within the stone walls of abbeys, small apothecaries were built. Shelves were lined with dried herbs, oils, and precious substances kept in corked bottles and clay jars. The Benedictine monks, in particular, became skilled in growing and preparing herbal remedies. They tended to gardens filled with sage, rosemary, lavender, and valerian root. These weren't planted for fragrance alone, they were carefully chosen for their healing effects. Sage was used to treat infections of the mouth and throat. Lavender calmed the nervous system and helped people sleep. Valerian, with its strong earthy smell, was given to those suffering from anxiety or tremors. And rosemary, now a common kitchen herb, was soaked in wine and applied to sore joints or drunk to aid digestion. These monks didn't perform surgeries, but they documented symptoms, prepared balms, and comforted the sick with gentle routines. In a time when fear ruled much of public life, their gardens offered a quiet place of restoration. Outside the monasteries, however, medicine was more chaotic. It was an age of barber surgeons, who cut hair, pulled teeth, and amputated limbs. Their tools were few, but their experience was often broad. Surgery, while dangerous, was sometimes the only option for injuries sustained in battle or through infection. To numb the pain, they used mixtures of opium and alcohol, sometimes combined with crushed mandrake root. Bloodletting was still practiced, as it had been in Greek and Roman times. The belief in the four humors persisted: if someone had a fever, it was thought they had too much blood. Leeches were placed on the skin, or veins were opened with small blades. And while we now know this wasn't always helpful, it reveals something important: people were still trying. Still experimenting. Still hoping. During this time, another curious practice emerged: urine analysis. Medieval physicians would examine the color, smell, and even taste of a patient's urine to determine illness. They believed the body's imbalances could be detected through this golden window. It sounds strange today, but the instinct was correct. Modern doctors still use urine to detect infections, kidney issues, and even diabetes. Then came the Black Death, a plague that swept across Europe in the 14th century, killing millions. People turned to anything they could. Some doctors wore long robes and bird-like masks filled with herbs and vinegar-soaked cloth, believing the smell would ward off the disease. These figures, now iconic, were known as plague doctors. Though their understanding was limited, their efforts were genuine. They carried sticks to examine patients from a distance. They burned infected clothing, isolated the sick, and even attempted early forms of quarantine. In some cases, they unknowingly slowed the spread. In others, they were simply witnesses to a force they could not stop. Still, medicine marched on. The Renaissance would soon rise, bringing with it a revival of anatomy, science, and a deeper curiosity about the human body. But in these darker centuries, the healers of Europe, monks, barbers, midwives, and plague doctors, kept a fragile thread of knowledge alive. They stitched wounds. They calmed the feverish. They held trembling hands. And through their imperfect care, the memory of ancient healing endured. While Europe faced plague and superstition, across the world in Japan, medicine was evolving with its own quiet precision. Influenced by Chinese healing traditions, but uniquely shaped by Japanese philosophy, the early medical practices here blended herbal remedies, spiritual belief, and a deep respect for nature's rhythms. In ancient Japan, sickness was often seen as a disharmony. Not just within the body, but between the body and the environment. The cure, therefore, was not only about treating the symptom but restoring inner and outer balance. Much like in Chinese medicine, Japanese healers used a network of energy points, what they called karaku, or meridians, to guide their treatments. Acupuncture and moxibustion were both used. Moxibustion, in particular, became a refined and essential part of care. It involved the slow burning of a soft plant, usually mugwort, near or on the skin to stimulate circulation and heal internal disorders. The warmth of the flame was said to move stagnation, to awaken the body's natural healing ability. Patients would sit quietly as a healer gently applied these glowing embers, the scent of the herb rising with the smoke. It was not painful, but calming, almost meditative. The Japanese also maintained detailed records of herbs and natural treatments. Kampo, a system of herbal medicine adapted from China, became widely practiced. Remedies were crafted with great care, combinations of roots, flowers, and barks designed to support the body's own strength. For fevers, they used angelica root and ginger. For digestive trouble, plum extract and licorice. And for nervous conditions or melancholy, teas made with chrysanthemum, ginseng, or skullcap were given to gently ease the mind. But healing in Japan was not only physical. It was aesthetic. The space itself was part of the medicine. A patient might be treated in a quiet wooden room, the walls open to a garden where wind moved through bamboo and koi swam silently in shallow pools. The atmosphere, light, scent, sound, was part of the recovery. And even now, the Japanese concept of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, encourages people to walk slowly through trees and greenery as a form of natural therapy. To them, healing was a full-body experience. The body. The mind. The environment. Now, if we travel to the African continent, we find a rich and diverse history of medicine that spans thousands of years and countless cultures. From the Berbers of North Africa to the Bantu tribes of the South, healing traditions were passed from elder to apprentice, rooted in nature and ancestral knowledge. In ancient Egypt, as we've explored, medicine was highly organized and even documented. But elsewhere, it was more oral, more fluid, no less wise, only different in form. African healers, often called sangomas, babalawos, or simply medicine men and women, used plants, minerals, animal parts, and spiritual rituals to treat the sick. The plants they selected were not random. Some were deeply effective. Devil's claw for inflammation. Hoodia for appetite control. African wormwood for fever and colds. Baobab fruit for its high vitamin C and digestive benefits. But healing also involved drumming, song, and trance states, through which the healer could connect with ancestors or spiritual forces. Illness, especially if persistent, was sometimes seen as the result of spiritual imbalance or a message from the beyond. What's striking is that many of these traditions are still alive today. They coexist with modern medicine, not as opposition, but as a complement. And in rural areas where access to clinics is limited, these ancient methods continue to save lives. In every region, in every culture, you find the same core idea, that healing is an act of listening. Not just to symptoms, but to stories. To the body's silence. To the wisdom of the earth. And when that listening is deep enough, even without modern tools, something remarkable happens. As we rest deeper into the folds of history, we begin to see a quiet thread connecting all of these worlds. No matter the continent, the language, or the gods they prayed to, that thread is care. And nowhere is that more clearly felt than in the hands of the midwives and herbal women who practiced their healing in the shadows of empires. For centuries, women were the primary caretakers of the sick. They knew which leaves soothed a fever. They knew how to ease a troubled birth. They memorized recipes for teas and poultices, many of which came not from books, but from whispers passed down mother to daughter, healer to apprentice. In medieval Europe, long before formal medicine allowed women into its halls, these women worked in cottages and forests, tending to neighbors and strangers alike. They delivered babies, treated burns, helped the elderly sleep, and made salves from whatever the earth would give them. They used comfrey root for broken bones, chamomile for stress and sleeplessness, St. John's wort to lift sorrow, and black cohosh to ease the pains of childbirth. Many of these remedies are still used today, some even bottled and sold in pharmacies, but in those times, the knowledge lived in stories and soil. These women did not always have titles. They were not doctors. But their work was sacred, and in many cases, quietly miraculous. Yet, with time, suspicion grew. In Europe, the rise of formal religious institutions brought fear of the unknown. Herbalists and midwives, especially those who lived outside towns or offered healing that didn't come from scripture, were accused of witchcraft. Thousands were persecuted during the Inquisitions and witch trials, many burned, drowned, or cast out for doing nothing more than preparing a tea or laying hands on the ill. Even so, their legacy endured. And today, we recognize that much of modern herbalism owes its roots to these quiet figures, so often unnamed, yet essential. Across the ocean, in the indigenous cultures of the Americas, midwives were also central to the life of the community. In the Aztec Empire, midwives were so highly regarded they were given ceremonial roles. They bathed newborns in herbal water, chanted blessings, and wrapped the child in swaddles embroidered with symbols for protection. Their birthing rooms were dim and quiet, often near a small fire, with herbs smoldering in bowls to ease the mother's pain. Plants like chili peppers, cacao, and coca leaves were all used, some to numb, some to energize, some to calm. The Inca used a plant called muna to clear airways and treat nausea. It has a fresh, mint-like aroma and is still brewed in Andean homes today. In times of childbirth or severe illness, family members would sit nearby, offering not advice, but presence. A reminder that healing was not only physical, it was communal. These practices may sound simple, but they reflect something deep. The idea that healing takes time. That comfort matters. That a warm hand on the back, or a bowl of steam rising in the dark, can be as powerful as any pill. As we lay here now, listening, there is something reassuring in knowing that this care, this soft, ancient care, has always existed. Long before we had words for bacteria or infection or immunity, we had people who paid attention. Who watched. Who remembered. They saw which leaf helped a wound close, which root soothed a restless child, which chant calmed the heartbeat. And they gave it, freely, because someone was suffering. And so we drift with them now, through the long corridors of memory and earth. Not rushing. Not curing. Just tending. Quietly. Gently. Let us pause here, in the quiet comfort of the past, and reflect on something often overlooked, how medicine was not only about survival, but about ritual. In many cultures, the act of healing was inseparable from rhythm, from pattern, from sound. In the Pacific Islands, for example, healing chants were considered just as important as herbs. A medicine person, known in some traditions as a kahuna, would sing over the patient as they applied oils or herbs, believing that the vibration of the voice carried spiritual power. These weren't casual lullabies. They were learned chants, memorized syllable by syllable, sometimes passed down only to one chosen apprentice in a generation. The chant was not merely background, it was medicine itself. Healing here often began with coconut oil, used as a base for other ingredients. It softened the skin, carried heat into sore muscles, and served as a gentle barrier against infection. Mixed with crushed noni fruit, it was used for inflammation, fevers, and even wounds. Other remedies came from the sea. Coral powder, crushed into a fine dust, was sometimes used to treat skin conditions. Seaweed, particularly red varieties, was made into poultices or eaten for its nutrient-rich, soothing properties. Healers also worked with breadfruit leaves, hibiscus, and kava. Kava, especially, was central in many healing ceremonies. Made into a calming drink, it soothed anxiety, eased pain, and opened the way for conversation between healer and patient. Even now, kava is used as a natural remedy for stress and sleep, evidence of an ancient practice that still resonates. In these island cultures, nature was close and constant. Medicine was not something separate. It was gathered from the forest in the morning, applied in the afternoon, and returned to the soil when its work was done. Just as in other parts of the world, healing was accompanied by touch, by song, and by silence. All three were used with equal respect. And while their tools may have been simple, hands, leaves, voice, their impact was lasting. Now let's travel to the north again, this time into the dense forests and chill winds of the Nordic world. Among the ancient Scandinavians, healing was deeply entwined with mythology and natural observation. They believed that illness could be caused by unseen spirits or by curses, but they also relied heavily on plants, minerals, and bathing rituals. In Norse sagas, you will find references to healing women, sometimes called vulvas or seidkona, female seers who could both divine the future and treat the sick. These women held a unique place in their communities. They were feared, respected, and often sought in times of both birth and death. One commonly used plant was yarrow, known for its ability to stop bleeding. Warriors carried it into battle. It was stuffed into wounds and brewed into teas for colds and fevers. Another was meadowsweet, used for its pain-relieving properties. Like willow bark, it contained natural compounds that eased inflammation. The Norse also used charcoal from burned wood to treat upset stomachs, something modern medicine still recognizes today in the form of activated charcoal. Bathing was sacred. The use of steam baths, what we might call saunas now, was part of physical cleansing but also spiritual renewal. Birch branches were sometimes used to gently strike the skin, encouraging circulation and releasing tension. The body was warmed, soothed, and prepared for rest. It's easy to forget, with our glowing screens and fast cures, how much of medicine once relied on atmosphere, on soft light, on warmth, on the quiet trust between healer and patient. These traditions whisper to us, even now. In a drop of oil. In a cup of tea. In the breath we take before sleep. And so, with the flicker of firelight behind us, we continue. In the hush of the ancient world, where silence was sacred and time moved slowly, medicine was not just something you took. It was something you entered. A space, a rhythm, a way of being with your body. And nowhere is this more gently seen than in the art of bathing for healing, a practice shared by nearly every ancient civilization. Let's begin in Rome, where public bathhouses were not only social centers, but health sanctuaries. The Romans believed deeply in the power of water to cleanse not just the skin, but the mind. A typical bathhouse offered more than one temperature. There was the caldarium, a hot bath that loosened muscles. The tepidarium, a warm pool for resting. And the frigidarium, a cold plunge to invigorate the body. Even those who didn't fully understand bacteria instinctively sensed that a clean, warm body resisted illness better than a tired, cold one. Bathing was often followed by an oil rub, olive oil, gently applied and scraped away with a curved tool called a strigil. It removed sweat, dirt, and fatigue, leaving the skin softened and the spirit calmed. In Turkey, the tradition evolved into the hammam, a steam-filled sanctuary lined with marble. Steam opened the pores. Warm water poured over the back. Scented soaps and clays were rubbed into the skin, then rinsed slowly, tenderly, without hurry. Across the seas in Japan, the ritual of the onsen, a hot spring bath, was both a personal and communal experience. Heated by the earth, these mineral-rich waters were said to treat arthritis, fatigue, skin conditions, and more. The Japanese concept of bathing includes misogi, the cleansing of not only the body but the spirit. Even today, many still slip into these waters at the end of a long day, letting silence and steam dissolve what words cannot. In India, too, water held healing power. The ancient practice of abhyanga, or oil massage followed by warm bathing, was rooted in Ayurvedic medicine. Sesame or mustard oil, warmed and infused with herbs, was massaged into the scalp, the limbs, the back. It was said to move stagnant energy, release tension, and nourish the skin. Children, elders, and the sick were all treated this way, not as luxury, but as necessity. Healing did not have to mean pain. Sometimes, it was warmth. Pressure. The steady motion of someone's hands doing nothing more than tending to the body in its most basic form. In the colder reaches of the world, like the forests of Russia, the banya served a similar role. Inside these wood-fired saunas, steam was created by pouring water over hot stones. Birch branches, tied together, were used to lightly brush the skin. This practice, called venik, was thought to improve blood flow and release toxins. What all these cultures knew, without labs, without textbooks, was that heat calms the nervous system. That touch slows the heart. That a clean body often leads to a more peaceful mind. And perhaps more than anything, they knew that healing often begins when you stop running. When you sit still. When the water is warm, the voice beside you is soft, and the world outside the bathhouse fades for just a little while. Even now, when our medicine has grown complex and fast, we find ourselves returning to these old ways. We soak. We breathe steam. We anoint our skin with oils and salts passed down from forgotten recipes. And in doing so, we echo thousands of years of care. In the quiet of a bath, in the hush of steam rising, we remember. As we continue our journey through ancient healing, one truth becomes clearer with each step: many of the methods that seem strange to us now were born from deep attention. Observation, patience, and generations of trial. And perhaps nowhere is that more evident than in the use of plants as anesthetics and pain relief, long before syringes and sterile rooms. In the mountains of Peru, long before the Spanish ever arrived, the Quechua people used the leaves of a sacred plant to treat fatigue and dull pain. This plant was the coca leaf. They chewed it slowly, allowing its compounds to seep into the bloodstream. It did not intoxicate. It awakened. It soothed. For those living at high altitudes, where breath came shallow and labor was constant, coca was a gentle companion. Centuries later, scientists would isolate cocaine from the coca plant and learn of its numbing properties. In small, controlled doses, it was used in some of the earliest forms of local anesthesia. But the Quechua already knew its power, not as a drug, but as medicine, woven into ceremony and respect. In India, the roots of the opium poppy were known for their ability to relieve deep pain. Ayurvedic healers used it sparingly, diluted in teas or tinctures, to calm patients suffering from unbearable aches. It was treated not as escape, but as a bridge, something to carry the patient through the worst, without fear. Across the sea, in China, early surgeons performed complex procedures with herbal sedation. A legendary physician named Hua Tuo, practicing around the 2nd century, is said to have created a powerful anesthesia called mefizin, a combination of wine and powdered herbs. It was given to patients before surgery. And according to ancient texts, he used it to perform abdominal procedures, something nearly unthinkable for the time. While the exact formula of mefizin is lost, many scholars believe it included datura, hemp, and other narcotic herbs, all of which contain compounds that can dull pain and induce sleep. The use of such mixtures was risky. The difference between a calming dose and a deadly one was often slim. But these early healers understood balance. They knew when to use caution, and when to reach deeper into nature's cabinet. In Africa, as well, pain was managed through a careful combination of plant remedies and rhythmic healing rituals. The San people of southern Africa, one of the world's oldest cultures, used devil's claw, a root with strong anti-inflammatory effects. Even today, it is sold in modern pharmacies as a natural pain reliever. They also used smoke from burning herbs to lull a person into a trance. The rhythm of drums, the sway of movement, and the scent of fire together created a state of stillness where healing could happen, not always by removing pain, but by helping the patient move through it. In these ancient practices, we find a deep tenderness towards suffering. Not a rush to erase it, but an invitation to ease it gently. To hold it. To understand it. They did not have morphine drips or surgical lights. What they had was stillness. And knowledge passed down not in charts, but in stories told beside firelight, in recipes whispered while gathering herbs, in hands that learned by doing. To them, pain was not just a thing to silence, it was a message. And healing was the art of listening to it, responding with kindness, and staying close until it passed. There's something deeply human in the way ancient people treated the wounds they could not see. In the modern world, we call it mental health. But centuries ago, when language had not yet separated body from spirit, the mind was simply another part of the person in need of care. In many cultures, what we now describe as anxiety, depression, or trauma was addressed with quiet routines, plant medicines, and most importantly, community. Among the Greeks, it was understood that a troubled mind could lead to physical suffering. Hippocrates believed that sadness, what he called melancholia, was linked to the imbalance of black bile in the body. While his theory of humors may be outdated, his instinct to treat mood with rest, food, baths, and music was wise. He would prescribe time in nature, changes in diet, even travel, to lift a heavy spirit. Some patients were brought to Asclepions, healing temples dedicated to the god of medicine, where they would lie in dark, cool rooms, sleep beside incense, and listen to flowing water. Healing dreams were encouraged, and silence was part of the remedy. In India, Ayurvedic medicine treated the mind with herbs like Brahmi, believed to sharpen memory and calm nervous thoughts. Ashwagandha was used for fear, restlessness, and physical weakness caused by grief or chronic worry. Rather than isolating those in emotional pain, Ayurvedic tradition brought them into warmth. Oils were used to soothe the skin and scalp. Fragrant smoke was burned to cleanse the senses. The treatment was gentle and slow. In China, mental unease was seen as a disruption of energy, too much fire in the heart, or wind in the liver. Acupuncture was used not just for physical pain, but to calm the mind. Thin needles placed in carefully chosen points would slow racing thoughts, lift exhaustion, and balance sleep. But treatment didn't stop with the needle. Patients were encouraged to meditate, sip teas brewed with lotus seed, licorice root, and longan fruit, and engage in qigong, a series of movements and breath designed to restore internal balance. In many indigenous cultures across the Americas and Africa, the mind was inseparable from the spirit. If someone was withdrawn, erratic, or overwhelmed with sorrow, the community responded. The healer didn't ask what was wrong. They asked what had been lost. Ceremony was part of the care. A gathering. A song. A place for the sufferer to be seen, but not judged. Often, herbs were burned, and prayers were spoken, not to fix, but to hold space. And perhaps this is what we've forgotten, that healing isn't always about doing. Sometimes it's about presence. The quiet company of someone who sits nearby and says, "I'll be here until the storm inside you softens." Even in medieval Europe, where much of mental illness was misunderstood, there were moments of compassion. Monasteries sometimes gave sanctuary to those deemed mad by society. They offered food, warm clothing, and structured daily life. The results were not always perfect, but within those walls, at least some were treated with dignity. Today, we are rediscovering many of these ancient truths. That sleep is healing. That touch can calm the nervous system. That the rituals of daily life, warm drinks, slow mornings, quiet evenings, are themselves medicine. The ancients did not always know the words we use now. But they knew how to listen. And when the mind grew heavy, they did not reach for noise. They reached for stillness. As we drift further into this quiet landscape of ancient medicine, we begin to notice something else. How many of these healing traditions were deeply rooted in rhythm? Not just the rhythm of chants or the beat of ceremonial drums, but the rhythm of the body itself. The rise and fall of breath. The pulse. The slow turning of the seasons. Many ancient healers understood that illness did not appear in isolation. It came with changes, in weather, in food, in grief, in sleep. And so they aligned their treatments not only with the body, but with the natural world. In Egypt, it was believed that the Nile's flooding cycle influenced health. As the river rose and brought life to the fields, certain plants grew stronger, their properties more potent. Specific herbs were gathered only at certain times of year. Timing was part of the medicine. In India, Ayurveda teaches that the seasons correspond with different dashas, those vital energies that shape health and personality. As summer heats the body, pitta increases, bringing with it inflammation and restlessness. Healers would recommend cooling foods, coconut water, and shatavari root to balance the excess fire. In China, traditional Chinese medicine links organ health to the lunar calendar. Spring is the time of the liver, when new growth mirrors detoxification. In winter, it is the kidneys that need warmth and support. Treatments followed this rhythm like a tide, flowing with the year instead of against it. This attentiveness to time was more than practical, it was reverent. The healers didn't try to control nature. They listened to it. And listening was everything. A patient might arrive with a cough. But the healer would watch how they sat, how they spoke. Did they rush? Did their hands tremble? Was their skin warm or dry? The cure might not be a single herb or a quick fix. It might be a change in sleeping hours, a bath with scented oils, a tea taken at twilight instead of morning. Healing was not about force. It was about returning to flow. In the Americas, especially among the Pueblo and Hopi peoples, this rhythm was honored through dance. Healing dances weren't performances. They were medicine. Movements repeated in long cycles, accompanied by soft drumming and chanting, were believed to restore the balance between earth and sky, body and soul. The patient didn't always dance. Sometimes they simply watched, wrapped in a woven blanket, listening to the heartbeat of the drum. That rhythm, steady and low, had a calming effect. It mirrored the body's own rhythm, guiding it gently back to peace. Today, modern neuroscience is just beginning to catch up to what the ancients knew intuitively. That rhythm affects the nervous system. That certain frequencies calm the mind. That slow, repetitive movement, like walking, rocking, or humming, can reduce anxiety and regulate breath. We find ourselves reaching again for what was never really lost. Sound baths, breath work, sleep stories, guided meditation, they all echo old patterns. The body remembers, even when the mind forgets. And so, as we sit in this space between wakefulness and sleep, we can honor that rhythm. The quiet beat of ancient drums. The rise and fall of river seasons. The whisper of a healer preparing herbs by the light of dusk. Healing doesn't always come like thunder. Sometimes it comes like a slow tide, returning us gently to ourselves. In the stillness of ancient nights, when the world was quieter and time moved like wind through trees, there were people who understood how to care for the dying. In many healing traditions, the end of life was not feared, it was prepared for. Guided. Held. Modern medicine often focuses on cure, on prolonging life, on fighting death. But in earlier centuries, and in many older cultures, the approach was different. When a person grew weak and it became clear that the journey was ending, the healer did not withdraw. They came closer. In ancient Greece, the art of a good death was called euthanasia, though its meaning was very different from how we use the word today. It simply meant a peaceful, noble death. A death without agony. It was a goal, not a decision. Doctors would ease the passing with warm drinks, herbs, and soothing words. They would quiet the room. Wash the body. Hold the hand. In Japan, the approach was more spiritual. A dying person was encouraged to speak their final words, to make peace with their life, and to leave behind messages for the family. Incense was burned to purify the space. A healer or monk might recite verses from sacred texts, helping the spirit release its ties to the body gently. One of the herbs commonly used was shiso leaf, brewed in warm water. It was thought to calm nausea and ease breath. Sometimes plum wine was given in small sips. Not to numb, but to warm the heart. In India, death was not an end, but a transformation. Ayurvedic tradition emphasized the need for clarity of mind in the final moments. For this, tulsi, or holy basil, was often placed near the bedside. Its fragrance was believed to support the soul's transition. Oil lamps were lit. Prayers were spoken. The dying were not left alone. Among the indigenous peoples of North America, especially among the Lakota and Navajo, death was part of the natural cycle. A time of honor. A time to remember. The dying person was surrounded by family, wrapped in blankets woven by hand, and often laid beside firelight. Songs were sung softly. Stories were told. The past was welcomed back to walk beside the present, just for a little while longer. In Africa, particularly among the Ashanti people, the care of the dying included the preparation of the body with oils and herbal washes. It was believed that how one was treated in their final days influenced how peacefully they entered the afterlife. Bitter herbs like bitter leaf were given to clear the stomach, while gentle herbs like lemongrass or hibiscus soothed the throat. What connects all of these practices is not just medicine, it is presence. The healer was not rushing to fix, not afraid to sit in silence. They were there to listen to the breath, to watch the eyes, to speak softly when words still mattered and to fall quiet when they didn't. The body was not discarded. It was cherished. The soul was not ignored. It was prepared. In our time, when death is often hidden behind doors and machinery, there is something deeply comforting about these old ways. They remind us that healing does not always mean surviving. Sometimes it means letting go with grace, being seen, being accompanied. The ancients knew this. And in their gentle rituals, their scented oils, their low prayers and steady hands, they gave the world a gift. A way to say goodbye that still heals the living. As we rest deeper into this tapestry of ancient healing, another quiet truth rises to the surface: some of the most powerful medicines were not things at all. Not roots. Not oils. Not rituals. But spaces. The healing power of where a person was, of what they saw, smelled, and heard while recovering or preparing to die. Many ancient traditions understood that the environment itself could soothe or disturb the spirit. A cramped, dark hut was not the same as a shaded courtyard with flowing water. A healer's touch worked better in silence than in noise. The mind relaxed more easily when the air carried the smell of lavender, or when the breeze shifted gently through reeds. In Persian medicine, physicians paid close attention to the placement of recovery beds. A patient was often moved closer to a garden or water feature if possible. The sound of water, they believed, calmed the heart and allowed the body to enter a more restful state. Today, we might call it ambient noise. Back then, it was simply understood: peace heals. Persian doctors like Rhazes and Avicenna were among the first to speak about what we now call environmental medicine. They knew that clean air, natural light, and a sense of order were just as important as tonics and ointments. Their hospitals were designed around courtyards, with wind towers to circulate fresh air, and fountains at the center. This wasn't for decoration. It was for balance. For healing. The idea that a patient's surroundings mattered also found its place in Chinese healing architecture. In traditional medicine, it was important that the room where someone was treated faced the correct direction, allowed light to filter gently in, and remained free of clutter or harsh angles. The philosophy of feng shui, which today is often dismissed as aesthetic, began as a way of ensuring the body and environment worked in harmony. In ancient Greece, the design of the Asclepian temples, places of healing, reflected this same principle. Patients would spend the night in long porticos open to the stars, or in chambers where soft wind could pass through. Sleep was part of the healing, but so was setting. It was called incubation, a quiet night spent in the temple, hoping for dreams that brought guidance or peace. In Japan, healing gardens known as karasansui were made not for walking, but for looking. Stones were placed with care. Raked sand formed soft patterns. Small plants grew between rocks. And though they offered no herbs, no bark, no tea, they calmed the breath. The person sitting quietly before them was already beginning to mend. Even in northern Europe, where the air was cold and the nights long, windows were sometimes carved into thick walls just to let in a sliver of sky. The dying would be turned to face the sunrise. And children recovering from fever were moved to the sunniest corner of the home, wrapped in blankets, lulled to sleep by the sound of wind against wood. We forget, sometimes, in our bright hospitals and our sterile machines, that healing is a sensory experience. That the body responds not only to medicine, but to beauty. To light. To quiet. The ancients remembered. They built healing not just in bottles, but in spaces. In the curve of a bench, the breath of wind through reeds, the sound of sandals on stone. The room itself was part of the treatment. And as we lie still now, listening, we too can begin to feel it. The warmth of sun on skin. The echo of water against clay. The scent of old wood and earth and quiet flowers. Healing begins again, not with force, but with stillness. In many of the ancient healing traditions we've explored, the body was never viewed alone. It was always part of something greater, woven into the land, into the stars, into the stories passed from elder to child. And in this view, healing became more than treatment. It became a kind of remembering. A returning to harmony. The body was seen as a vessel not only of flesh, but of memory and energy. When someone fell ill, it wasn't only because something physical had gone wrong. Perhaps they had eaten at the wrong time. Slept facing the wrong direction. Spoken something heavy and not released it. Every part of their life mattered. This understanding shaped how diagnosis was made. In traditional Chinese medicine, a healer would not rush to name the illness. Instead, they would take time. Feel the pulse at 3 different points, study the color of the tongue, listen to the tone of the voice, observe the movement of the eyes. These subtle signs told them more than a single complaint could. They had no stethoscopes, but they had attentiveness. The pulse diagnosis, in particular, was an art. Some practitioners could feel not just the speed of the pulse, but its shape, whether it was floating, slippery, wiry, or thready. Each quality told a story. Was the patient too hot inside? Too dry? Was the liver qi stuck? Was the blood thin, the spirit restless? We might raise an eyebrow now, trained to think only in numbers. But many modern doctors have quietly noted that their best skill is still observation. Seeing the whole person. Not just the lab report. In Ayurveda, the same principle applies. Diagnosis involves listening to the patient's story, their routines, their cravings, even their dreams. The color of their skin, the dryness of their lips, the sound of their breath. All are pieces of a larger pattern. Nothing is dismissed. Even in Greek medicine, where science began to emerge more visibly, the patient's lifestyle was essential to understanding the disease. Hippocrates often said that before treating someone, you must ask if they are willing to give up what made them sick. Food, sleep, stress, movement, all were part of the cure. This idea of total diagnosis, of treating the whole person, was echoed again and again across continents. In African traditions, especially in West Africa, a healer might sit with someone for hours before offering herbs or advice. They might ask questions not just about symptoms, but about the patient's relationships. Have they quarreled? Have they kept a secret? Has something been withheld or left unsaid? Because to them, illness was not separate from life. And healing was not separate from truth. In Native American healing, too, this deep listening was sacred. A person's dreams, their recent losses, their fears, these were all held gently in the healer's mind as they prepared medicine or ritual. The soul was always part of the diagnosis. Perhaps that's what modern medicine, for all its power, sometimes forgets. That the body is not a machine made only of parts. It is a rhythm. A story. A song that can fall out of tune. The ancients, with their simple tools and careful hands, tried not to fight the illness, but to guide the person back into alignment. Back to their nature. Back to stillness. And maybe that's why these traditions remain with us, not because they were perfect, but because they saw something essential. That healing begins with presence. That listening is medicine. In the soft memory of time, among herbs and hands and firelight, there is one more medicine we often forget. A force so subtle it's almost invisible, yet powerful enough to change breath, heartbeat, even pain. That force is touch. From the beginning of human history, we have used our hands not just to work, but to heal. A mother placing her palm on a child's forehead. A midwife rubbing oil into a laboring woman's back. A healer laying fingers gently over the chest of the sick, waiting for breath to steady. Ancient cultures did not separate touch from medicine. Touch was medicine. In India, the practice of abhyanga, the daily oil massage, was more than a luxury. It was part of life. Warm oil, often infused with herbs like brahmi, ashwagandha, or sandalwood, was rubbed slowly over the body to stimulate circulation, release tension, and ground the spirit. It was not rushed. It was quiet. The skin, they believed, was the gateway to the nervous system, and soothing it calmed the entire being. In China, healing touch took the form of Tui Na, an ancient massage technique that works along energy meridians. It includes kneading, pressing, and rolling motions designed to move blocked qi. Practitioners used it to treat everything from headaches to digestive troubles, from trauma to fatigue. Even today, Tui Na is used in hospitals in parts of China as a complement to acupuncture and herbal medicine. It is respected. It is studied. It works, not only because of the pressure, but because of the presence behind it. In Africa, healing touch often occurred in the form of ritual touch. The placing of hands during ceremonies, the passing of water from one person to another, the washing of limbs. These actions were physical, yes, but also symbolic. They meant care. They meant connection. Some cultures had laying on of hands ceremonies, where multiple people would gently rest their palms on someone who was unwell. No words needed. The message was clear: you are not alone. In the Pacific Islands, the tradition of Lomolomi massage carried the same spirit. Practiced for generations in Hawaii and Polynesia, it was rhythmic and flowing, using not just hands but forearms and even breath to guide healing. A true Lomolomi session might be accompanied by prayer, chant, or simple silence. The goal was to release stored pain, both physical and emotional. In Scandinavia, long before modern hospitals, family members would massage sore muscles after long days of labor, or rub warming salves into the feet before sleep. Birch oils, pine resins, and fats from hunted animals were used not only to warm the skin, but to bring the body back into balance with the cold. Touch could mean comfort. It could mean life. In ancient Egypt, even among the elaborate temples and scrolls of healing, doctors applied ointments with bare hands, gently smoothing them into wounds and across the chest. It wasn't just to deliver the medicine, it was to bring human presence into the healing. And what did all these traditions understand? That the skin remembers kindness. Modern science now tells us that gentle touch lowers cortisol, the stress hormone. It slows the heart rate. It increases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which helps reduce pain and fear. But the ancients didn't need to measure it. They saw it. They felt it. And they passed it down. So tonight, as we lie still and listen, we can remember something simple. Healing doesn't always require speech. Sometimes, it just needs warmth. A steady hand. And the knowledge that someone is near. As the candle burns lower and the air thickens with memory, we turn now to one of the strangest chapters in the long story of ancient medicine, cures that sound more like magic than science, yet somehow, in small and surprising ways, worked. In the great empires of the past, where myth and medicine often shared the same breath, people turned to the earth not just for roots and leaves, but for stones, metals, even animal parts, believing they carried healing powers. Let us begin in ancient Mesopotamia, where lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone flecked with gold, was ground into powder and mixed into salves for treating eye conditions. The stone was sacred, believed to carry divine favor. While its beauty was likely symbolic, the copper traces in the powder may have helped fight mild infections, even if its true benefit was ritual comfort. In ancient Egypt, mummy dust, yes, ground bits of real mummies, was sold and consumed well into the medieval period. People believed it could cure everything from bruises to epilepsy. While the practice is now understood to be both ineffective and ethically troubling, it shows how deeply people trusted the energy of the dead to influence the living. But not all strange remedies were empty. The use of clay as a healing agent, for instance, appeared across the ancient world. In Greece, a sacred clay called terra sigillata was taken internally to settle the stomach. In Mesopotamia, clay was applied to infected skin. We now know that some clays contain antibacterial minerals and can absorb toxins from wounds. What seemed like superstition was, in fact, early pharmacology. In China, powdered pearls were used for skin care and to calm the spirit. Rich in calcium, amino acids, and trace minerals, pearl powder was mixed into teas or ointments and believed to bring clarity, peace, and luminous skin. Even today, some traditional remedies still include finely ground pearl for its calming effects. Then there were animal-based remedies, some disturbing, some oddly effective. The fat of a python, in parts of West Africa, was melted and rubbed onto aching joints. In areas of Eastern Europe, dried toad skins were carried as protection against illness. In ancient Rome, snail slime was gathered and used to treat burns and sore throats. As odd as that sounds, modern skincare has rediscovered snail secretion for its soothing, collagen-boosting properties. One particularly unusual cure came from medieval India, where it was believed that placing a living leech on inflamed areas could draw out bad blood. The idea of bloodletting spanned many cultures, from Greece to China, and while it was often overused, leech therapy has made a quiet comeback in modern medicine. Their saliva contains anticoagulants and enzymes that promote healing after reconstructive surgery or to restore circulation. There were also treatments that were more ritual than remedy. In many traditions, words themselves were considered curative. Incantations were whispered over water before it was poured into a cup. Names of diseases were chanted and then buried in the earth. The idea was not just to heal the body, but to transform the story of illness into one of recovery. And perhaps there is something real in that. Because belief, when held gently and without fear, can shape perception. And perception, as modern science confirms, has a profound effect on the nervous system. So while we may smile at the powdered pearls and sacred clays, we must also admire them. They represent the human desire not just to survive, but to understand suffering, to wrap pain in meaning, and to try, again and again, to turn nature into comfort. And as we drift further into the night, these strange cures remind us of a quiet truth, that even the oddest remedy, if given with care, can bring peace. Let us now walk through a more familiar doorway, one that leads into the kitchen. Because sometimes, the most effective ancient medicines were hiding in plain sight. In pots, in gardens, in spice jars handed down from generation to generation. Long before they were seasoning, many of the herbs and spices we know today were medicine first. Garlic, for instance, wasn't just a flavor. It was a healer. Used in ancient Egypt, Greece, China, and India, garlic was considered a remedy for infections, fatigue, and even heart conditions. The builders of the pyramids were given garlic daily to keep up strength. And soldiers in Roman legions ate it before battle. Today, we know garlic contains allicin, a powerful antimicrobial compound that can fight bacteria and reduce inflammation. Crushed raw and eaten or steeped in warm oil, it served as a shield long before antibiotics ever existed. Ginger is another. Across Asia, it was used to treat nausea, colds, and joint pain. In China, ginger tea with honey was a common remedy for flu-like symptoms. In India, it was boiled with milk and cardamom as a tonic to warm the stomach and clear phlegm. Modern research confirms ginger's ability to soothe the gut and reduce motion sickness. But to the ancients, it was simply known as something that worked, gentle, warming, safe. Turmeric, now trendy in modern health circles, was a mainstay of Ayurvedic and Unani medicine for centuries. Mixed with warm milk, it was taken to reduce swelling, ease arthritis, and improve digestion. Applied to wounds, it was known to speed healing and reduce scarring. The compound curcumin is responsible for many of turmeric's benefits, and studies today are exploring its role in fighting inflammation and even certain chronic diseases. But centuries ago, it was trusted through experience, not data. In ancient Rome and Greece, cinnamon was worth more than gold. It was burned in temples and added to healing oils. Its warming nature was believed to stimulate blood flow and awaken the senses. A pinch of cinnamon in wine or honey water was used for colds, fatigue, and low spirits. Honey, as we've already seen, wasn't just sweet, it was sacred. Healers used it to dress wounds, soothe throats, and preserve other remedies. Its natural enzymes made it both antibacterial and antifungal. Even now, modern hospitals use medical-grade honey on burns and chronic wounds. The use of salt also carried medicinal weight. Beyond preserving food, salt was used to clean wounds, gargle away throat infections, and draw out toxins. In both the Roman and Islamic worlds, salt was seen as a purifier, of the body and the spirit. These common elements, garlic, ginger, turmeric, honey, salt, were the foundation of healing traditions for millions. They were affordable, available, and shared from one household to the next. Even more complex mixtures, like golden paste, a blend of turmeric, black pepper, and oil, show how deeply the ancients understood the synergy between ingredients. The pepper boosts the absorption of curcumin. The oil soothes the digestive tract. It's a recipe still used today. There is comfort in knowing that healing didn't always come from faraway temples or sacred mountains. Sometimes it came from a clay bowl on a hearth. A cup of warm tea passed from hand to hand. A spoonful of something fragrant, simmered slowly, meant to calm. And in that small act, a shared remedy, a remembered recipe, we find not only relief, but connection. So as we lie here, listening, let the scent of ginger and clove drift gently through memory. And remember that the first pharmacy was not built with walls, but grown in gardens. In the glow of early civilization, there were those who watched the sky not just for storms or omens, but for healing. They believed that the body, like the moon and stars, followed a rhythm. That time itself could be a kind of medicine, or a source of illness when ignored. This belief gave rise to the ancient practice of medical astrology, the idea that a person's health could be influenced by celestial patterns. And while modern science separates medicine from the stars, it's worth wandering into that twilight world for a moment, to see what the ancients saw. In Babylon, among the oldest astrologers, the sky was a kind of map, not just of fate, but of the flesh. They divided the body into zones, each governed by a planet or constellation. The head was ruled by Aries, the chest by Cancer, the feet by Pisces. A fever during a waning moon might be treated differently than one during its rise. In the Greek world, this idea was refined. Hippocrates himself, though rooted in observation and logic, believed that lunar cycles affected the body's moisture and balance. He once said, "A physician without a knowledge of astrology has no right to call himself a physician." To them, it was not superstition, it was pattern. And in an era without microscopes or blood tests, patterns were everything. They noticed, for example, that some people fell ill repeatedly during full moons. Others were restless or sleepless during eclipses. Women's monthly cycles aligned with the lunar phases, and tides mirrored the pull of the moon. Was it such a leap, then, to imagine that internal tides moved as well? In Ayurvedic medicine, the timing of treatments was crucial. Certain herbs were gathered only on full moons. Oil was applied in the early morning, before the sun rose high. Fasting followed the lunar calendar. Everything was thought to carry more or less potency depending on the hour, the season, the moon's place in the sky. In China, the heavenly stems and earthly branches, a system of timekeeping tied to cosmic cycles, helped determine the most favorable times for acupuncture or herbal administration. Illness wasn't just a breakdown of the body. It was a sign that the patient had fallen out of harmony with the universe. The Maya, known for their precise calendars and astronomical knowledge, believed the movement of Venus could influence fertility and sickness. Healing ceremonies were timed to match celestial alignments, and certain days were considered lucky, or dangerous, for surgical procedures. Even in medieval Europe, surgeons often consulted lunation charts before performing bloodletting. They believed the moon's position could affect the success of the treatment, and whether the patient would recover quickly or weaken. Today, we tend to look back on these beliefs as curious relics. But even now, many of us sleep differently under a full moon. We feel the seasons shift in our bones. We crave light in winter and rest in summer. The body, whether we admit it or not, still listens to the sky. What the ancients offered wasn't precision in the way we now demand. It was presence. A sense of being part of something vast and alive. They treated illness not just as a failure of the body, but as a sign, a whisper from the stars that balance needed restoring. So tonight, as we listen to this soft history unfold, we can look up. We can remember that long ago, someone stood barefoot in the sand, watching the moon, asking not what they could take, but when they should begin. And in that question, the healing had already started. As we continue walking slowly through these quiet corridors of ancient care, we begin to see that some healing came not through herbs or rituals, but through the power of the senses, particularly sound. Sound, to the ancients, was more than communication. It was vibration. A tool to move energy. A way to calm, to call, to carry pain away. In Tibetan tradition, singing bowls were used not for music, but for medicine. These metal bowls, when struck or circled with a mallet, produced a low, humming tone that seemed to resonate through the bones. Healers would place them near the body, or directly on the chest or back, and let the vibration move through tissue and breath. The belief was that illness often came from blocked or stagnant energy. Sound could move what the body could not. It could open space. It could restore flow. Modern studies now suggest that certain frequencies do have effects on the nervous system, lowering heart rate, reducing anxiety, even easing chronic pain. The ancient Tibetans, without needing to prove it, knew this through practice. In Egypt, priests of healing temples used intoned chants during treatment. These weren't just prayers. They were meant to entrain the patient's body into stillness. Some temples had chambers specifically designed to echo in a certain way. So that sound would swirl and return softly, creating a sensation of timelessness. One of the most common sounds used was the vowel, ah, thought to resonate with the heart and lungs. Patients would sit, breathe deeply, and sing together with the priest. The sound was not loud. It was deliberate. It settled the breath. It made the body a vessel for vibration. In India, the healing use of sound is deeply woven into the roots of mantra. These sacred syllables, often repeated over and over, were not always meant to be understood logically. They were vibrational patterns. Medicine for the mind. The mantra, Om, for example, is said to align breath, brain, and body. Chanted in deep tones, it slows brain waves and brings the practitioner into a state of inner quiet. Many yogic healing traditions begin and end with this sound, not to worship, but to tune the body like an instrument. In the Pacific Islands, especially in Polynesian cultures, chanting played a vital role in healing ceremonies. The kahuna, or healer, would sing gently over the patient while applying herbal oils. The songs weren't improvised. They were memorized lines passed down through generations, each one tied to a specific remedy or illness. Even in Europe, particularly in Celtic regions, there were soft healing songs sung to children and the ill. These were lullabies, yes, but also invocations. Rhythms were slow. Tones were minor. The singer might circle the bed, moving slowly, braiding voice and movement together like a spell. And in Africa, drums were not always loud or wild. Some rhythms were slow, steady, almost like a heartbeat. They were used to bring a fevered child back to calm, to guide a community through mourning, or to gently return someone from a trance. The vibration of the drum, deep and ancient, was seen as a bridge between this world and the next. The common thread in all these traditions is clear: sound heals not by force, but by resonance. It doesn't demand. It invites. It settles the body. It clears the air. It fills the silence not with noise, but with presence. So tonight, as we lie still, perhaps we too can hear it, the low hum of a bowl, the rhythm of a drum, the soft murmur of a chant rising like breath in the dark. As we continue on this gentle path, another element begins to emerge. One that touched nearly every healing tradition, yet often goes unnoticed. It is not an herb or a ritual or a tool. It is something even older. It is story. From the earliest fireside gatherings to the scrolls etched in forgotten temples, stories were the vessels that carried medicine forward. They weren't just used to explain illness. They were part of the healing. In many cultures, a healer was also a storyteller. When someone came with pain, the treatment might begin not with a tincture, but with a tale. A parable about a hunter who outran his fever by forgiving a friend. A myth about a tree that only grew where tears had fallen. A legend of a woman who healed her heart by walking backwards into the wind. These stories were more than metaphors. They offered models of recovery. They gave shape to suffering. And perhaps most importantly, they reminded the sick that they were not alone. In African healing traditions, especially among the Yoruba and Ashanti, stories were woven into ceremonies. As herbs were prepared, tales were told. They carried wisdom about which plants to use, but also how to live well. How to grieve. How to return. Among the First Nations peoples of North America, healing circles often began with shared stories. Elders would speak of times when they too had been lost, or wounded, or afraid. These weren't confessions. They were bridges. Reminders that healing is a path others have walked before. In India, Ayurvedic texts like the Charaka Samhita are filled not just with remedies, but with narratives. Dialogues between teacher and student, between physician and king. The lessons are never cold or clinical. They unfold like stories because they were meant to be remembered. A healer might tell a tale while applying warm oil. Might recite verses while mixing herbs. The story was part of the rhythm, part of the medicine itself. In ancient Greece, patients at the temples of Asclepius were encouraged to dream. Upon waking, they would tell their dreams to the healer, who would listen carefully, not only for symbols, but for the story underneath. Interpretation wasn't just a tool. It was a form of therapy. a way to make the unconscious visible. And in China, traditional physicians often used old folktales to explain the balance of yin and yang, the flow of qi, the causes of illness. These were not lectures. They were quiet teachings hidden inside narrative. A sick child, frightened and restless, might fall asleep listening to the story of the dragon who swallowed too much wind and had to sleep under the mulberry tree to find peace again. Today, we often separate facts from stories. But in the ancient world, there was no such wall. Facts were wrapped in myth. Data came dressed in metaphor. And for many, that made them easier to hold. Because sometimes, especially in illness, the mind is too tired to memorize, too frightened to analyze. What it needs is something soft, something kind, something human. It needs story. The ancients knew that a tale told in the right tone, at the right time, could slow the breath. Could calm the shaking hands. Could open a door to rest. And so they told them. In firelight, in temples, in huts made of woven grass, in stone buildings beside rivers now forgotten. Their stories echo still. In the way we reach for fairy tales. In the way we explain pain to children. In the way a quiet voice can still carry someone through the night. As the fire of this journey glows low and steady, we begin to understand a deeper pattern. That ancient medicine, in all its forms, herbs, chants, touch, sound, story, was never about fixing something broken. It was about restoring what had become disconnected. One of the most profound examples of this was the role of communal healing. In many early cultures, sickness wasn't seen as an individual failure or flaw. It was a ripple in the larger web, a signal that something in the person's life, or even the community itself, was out of balance. To heal, then, meant to reconnect. With the body. With others. With the land. With spirit. In indigenous Australian traditions, illness was often understood as a loss of connection to the dreaming. The ancient, ongoing spiritual story that ties the people to the land and their ancestors. Healing involved songlines, ritual journeys and chants that re-anchored the sick person into the sacred landscape. A person might be guided to lie on sacred ground, to listen to the voices of elders, to sing the old songs until they felt themselves not alone, but held. Not drifting, but returned. In African tribal healing, particularly among the San and Zulu, communal healing ceremonies were essential. These were not passive gatherings. They were vibrant, rhythmic, alive. Everyone had a role, dancing, drumming, praying, singing. The energy of the group helped move pain through and out of the individual. One well-known practice is the trance dance, where healers and community members enter an altered state through repetitive movement and sound. In this state, they access what some call the healing spirit or energy. And when they lay hands on the sick, it is not just their power. It is the collective force of the group, focused and warm. In Hawaiian tradition, the practice of Ho'oponopono was a family-centered healing ritual. It wasn't about herbs or physical cures, but about forgiveness. A family would gather to resolve a conflict that might have caused emotional or spiritual illness in one member. Each person would take turns speaking. Then they would all repeat simple, powerful words: "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you." This act of reconciliation, done quietly and often with tears, was believed to clear the heart and restore harmony. In early Celtic societies, healing often took place in sacred groves or stone circles. The Druid healers would guide the ill into nature and invoke the elements, earth, water, fire, air, as witnesses and helpers. The patient was not just a body with symptoms. They were part of the forest, the wind, the stream. Realignment could not happen indoors. It had to happen where life began. And in Japan, the quiet practice of forest bathing, or Shinrin-yoku, although more recently named, reflects an ancient understanding that the presence of trees, birdsong, and filtered sunlight can reset the mind and slow the pulse. No tools needed. Just presence. Across these cultures, we see the same wisdom, that humans are not meant to heal in isolation. That the body remembers belonging. And that sometimes, the greatest medicine is to be surrounded by those who care, not trying to cure, but simply willing to stay close. Modern life often separates us. Screens, schedules, and silence build walls. But ancient medicine teaches us something softer. That healing happens when we are seen. When we are gathered. When the rhythm of many hearts beats quietly beside our own. With every step deeper into the practices of the ancient world, we find ourselves circling a quiet truth. Many of these traditions were as much about prevention as they were about cure. In fact, much of what we now call wellness was simply daily life for the ancients. They didn't wait until illness came crashing down. Instead, they crafted lives meant to support balance. This was especially true in the teachings of Ayurveda, the ancient Indian science of life. A person's constitution, dasha, was observed from birth. Their food, sleep, exercise, and even emotional expression were guided gently according to this internal map. The goal was not perfection. It was rhythm. Rising with the sun. Eating warm food when the body felt cold. Drinking bitter herbs in spring, sweet ones in summer. Cleansing the body gently before the seasons shifted. In Ayurveda, daily practice is known as dinacharya, and it includes oil pulling, tongue scraping, nasal rinses, and morning prayer or meditation. Each small act was like brushing dust from the windows of the body. Keeping the channels clear. Keeping illness out. In China, similar principles governed yangsheng, the art of nourishing life. This was not a short-term fix, but a lifelong cultivation. A way to move through the world without exhausting one's internal energy, or qi. Practices included tai chi, herbal teas, seasonal eating, and balancing emotional responses. Anger, for instance, was believed to damage the liver. Grief could weaken the lungs. Instead of suppressing emotion, ancient healers encouraged mindful release. Breathing practices were used to exhale pain. Gentle movement, rather than intense strain, was favored for longevity. In Greek medicine, Hippocratic teachings emphasized prevention through moderation. Too much food, too little movement, too much cold or heat, any excess could cause imbalance. Healers advised regular walks, baths, laughter, and long conversations as part of daily health. They spoke often of eucrasia, a state of good mixture or balance in the body. It was not achieved by medicine alone, but by living well. And in Islamic medicine, particularly in the golden age of Arab and Persian healing, prevention was prized. Physicians like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, wrote entire volumes on hygiene, sleep, digestion, and emotional stability. Clean air, clean water, and clean thoughts were part of the same prescription. Even ancient Egypt, where healing was entwined with magic and religion, emphasized personal cleanliness, regular bathing, and food moderation. Many Egyptians shaved their heads not for style, but to prevent lice. They applied oils not just for scent, but to protect the skin from sun and insects. Across the world, prevention was woven into life. And it often began in childhood. Elders taught children how to sleep well, how to breathe deeply, how to eat slowly, how to notice when something felt off. It was not fear-based. There were no constant warnings. Just quiet attention. The same way one tends a garden, clearing debris, watering gently, letting the sun do its part. And maybe that's why many of these traditions lasted so long. Because they made health a rhythm, not a reaction. Something done every day, not just in moments of crisis. Today, as we race between tasks and reach for solutions only after things fall apart, these ancient patterns offer another way. A slower way. One rooted in trust, not panic. To wake before screens. To eat before we're starving. To rest before we collapse. To breathe deeply, often, without needing a reason. Prevention, in the ancient world, was an act of respect, for the body, for time, for life itself. There is a kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books or formulas. A knowing that lives in the hands, in the breath, in the quiet routines passed down through generations. In the ancient world, this wisdom was often carried not by the rulers or priests, but by the midwives and herbalists, the bone setters, the wise women who practiced healing in kitchens, fields, and shadowed corners of villages. These were the folk healers. Not always recognized by formal institutions, but deeply respected by those they helped. Their medicine was practical, intimate, often born from lived experience rather than written doctrine. In medieval Europe, especially in rural areas, healing was largely done by women. These women, often called cunning folk or wise women, knew the plants that eased childbirth, the poultices that drew out infection, the teas that soothed coughs. They understood how to set a broken bone with cloth and wood, how to pack a wound with moss, how to comfort the grieving with herbs that calmed the nerves. Many of their remedies, passed mouth to ear, later formed the backbone of modern pharmacology. But for centuries, their knowledge was treated as suspicious, too natural, too mysterious, too feminine. Some were accused of witchcraft. Others were quietly tolerated. Yet their patients kept coming. In Africa, traditional healers called sangomas or babalawos held a dual role, both medical and spiritual. They used divination, ancestral communication, and herbal preparation to guide their treatments. The line between doctor and priest was not drawn. A person's illness could come from the body or from a forgotten ritual, an unresolved grief, a spiritual imbalance. The healer treated all of it. In South America, especially among the Andean peoples, curandras and curanderos were central to village life. They knew the altitudes at which certain plants grew best. They created brews for digestion, salves for skin infections, and spiritual baths to wash away heavy energy. Their practices were grounded in both Catholic symbolism and indigenous beliefs, a blending of worlds that somehow held together. In Southeast Asia, particularly in rural Thailand and Indonesia, local healers used lemongrass, turmeric, galangal, and pandan not just to flavor food, but to heal the gut, calm fever, and purify the blood. Steamed compresses filled with herbs were applied to sore muscles. Oil massages used knowledge of energy lines that mirrored acupuncture meridians in China. These healers didn't often wear robes or work in clinics. They wore everyday clothes. They moved quietly. And yet, they carried traditions older than kings. What they offered was not just treatment, it was attention. They sat with the sick. They sang while they worked. They folded care into every motion, from the steeping of tea to the tying of a bandage. And they often knew what formal medicine didn't, how to recognize the illness of the heart. The grief that wouldn't speak. The loneliness that ate at the belly. The tension that made sleep impossible. They would rub the shoulders. Place a warm cloth on the forehead. Whisper a prayer while stirring broth. Even now, in many parts of the world, these community healers remain. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes openly. Their knowledge may not always be tested in labs, but it endures because it works. Because it's human. In the ancient world, these figures were vital. They held the medicine of patience, of story, of touch. They knew that healing was not just in the ingredients, but in the presence. And as we rest here, following the gentle path they left behind, we can still feel it. That old kindness. That slow, sacred way of caring. As night deepens and the air turns even softer, we reach a part of ancient healing often overlooked, dreams. Long before sleep was studied in clinics and brainwaves were measured with wires, dreams were considered sacred windows into the unseen. For many ancient cultures, a dream was not just a flicker of imagination. It was a message, a diagnosis, a prescription from the soul or the gods. And so, healing through dreams became a practice of its own. In ancient Greece, the most famous center of healing was not a hospital, but a temple, the Asclepion. People came from far and wide to be healed not by medicine, but by sleep. The process began with purification, bathing, fasting, sometimes offering a sacrifice. Then the patient would lie down in a quiet chamber, often in complete darkness, surrounded by sacred symbols. This was called incubation, not of illness, but of revelation. The hope was that Asclepius, the god of healing, would visit in a dream and offer a cure. And many claimed he did. They dreamed of snakes, of animals speaking, of strange rituals. Upon waking, they would tell the priests what they saw. Sometimes, the message was literal: apply this root, drink this water, walk this path. Other times, it was symbolic, a sign that healing required a change not in the body, but in the life. These dreams were recorded on temple walls. Not as fantasy, but as medicine. In Egypt, dreams were equally revered. Priest healers used dream interpretation to guide treatments. If someone dreamed of fire, perhaps their body carried too much heat. If they dreamed of drowning, maybe fluid was trapped in the lungs or belly. The body and the dream were not separate, they reflected each other. There were even dream books, written on papyrus, that matched images to meanings. A scorpion might mean danger. A white bird might signal recovery. Healing came not from denying the dream, but from understanding it. In China, dreams were part of diagnosis in traditional Chinese medicine. Dreaming of certain organs, like the liver or the heart, could indicate imbalance. Repeated nightmares were signs that Shen, the spirit, was disturbed. Remedies weren't always physical. Sometimes, they involved meditation, guided breathing, or herbal sleep tonics. In Islamic tradition, dreams were believed to carry insight from the divine. Great scholars and physicians often recorded their dreams alongside their treatments. Some even claimed that cures came to them not from study, but from visions received while resting. And among Native American tribes, especially the Ojibwe, dreams were more than personal, they were community tools. Children were taught to respect their dreams, to share them, to draw them. Vision quests, solitary fasts in nature, were used to invite dreams that revealed purpose, guidance, and even remedies. What all these cultures shared was the belief that healing was not only in the waking world. The dream offered something deeper, a mirror. It revealed buried emotions, unspoken fears, desires left unfulfilled. It showed the healer what the patient might not be able to say aloud. It invited stillness, intuition, and imagination into the healing process. Modern science now tells us that dreaming helps process trauma, regulates emotion, and even enhances immune function. What ancient healers sensed through intuition, we now trace in brain scans. But the heart of it remains unchanged. That a quiet room. A night of deep rest. A moment of meaning found in symbols, can all play a part in the return to balance. And so, as we lie still now, letting sleep gather behind the eyes, we remember that even in dreams, the body listens. The soul speaks. And healing continues, quietly, like a breath beneath the stars. There is something quietly powerful in the way ancient healing often merged the physical with the unseen. To treat the body, they honored the spirit. To ease pain, they also addressed meaning. And in this space where medicine met mystery, we find a curious tool used by cultures across the world. Rituals of release. These weren't medical procedures in the modern sense. They were acts of symbolism, intention, and transformation. Moments designed to help the sick, or the grieving, let go of what had weighed them down. In Mesoamerican cultures, particularly among the Maya and Aztecs, illness was sometimes seen as a form of spiritual blockage. A person might be carrying the burden of anger, guilt, or fear. To help clear it, a ritual called limpia was performed, a cleansing of the energy field. The healer, often using an egg, herbs like rue or sage, and sometimes copal incense, would pass these tools over the body, whispering prayers. The egg was believed to absorb negative energy. Afterward, it might be cracked into a glass of water and read like a map. The bubbles, shapes, or strands were studied as signs. Whether superstition or metaphor, the person being cleansed often felt lighter, calmer, unburdened. In West Africa, a healing called sacrifice of burden was practiced in some communities. If someone had been suffering a long illness, especially without clear cause, the healer might ask them to write down, or speak aloud, the things they could not forgive, the griefs they had never released. Then, these would be burned in fire, buried in the ground, or tied to an object cast into water. The point wasn't the item. It was the act. The ritual created a space for emotional release, which in many traditions was seen as a vital part of physical healing. Among the Balinese, ceremonies known as malukat are still performed today. These are water purification rituals, done at sacred springs or temple fountains. The person steps into cool, running water, bows their head, and allows the water to flow over their body. Incantations are spoken. Offerings are made. It's more than bathing. It's a symbolic washing away of imbalance, anxiety, or past harm. In Tibetan medicine, emotional toxins are considered just as dangerous as physical ones. One ritual involves writing your fears, angers, or regrets on a piece of paper, folding it into a small figure, and offering it to fire during a prayer ceremony. The smoke carries it away. The fire digests it. What remains is silence. In ancient Slavic traditions, there was the practice of whispering herbs, where the healer would speak quietly to the plants as they gathered them, naming the illness they were meant to treat. The herbs were then brewed into teas or pressed into poultices, infused not only with physical properties, but with intent. The ritual of naming gave shape to the problem. The act of brewing gave form to the solution. These small ceremonies may not change molecules, but they change meaning. And meaning, as modern psychology now understands, has a profound effect on healing. When we let go of what we carry inside, the nervous system softens. The immune system steadies. The body breathes more easily. Not every wound can be healed by symbol. But every heart benefits from being heard. And that's what these ancient rituals offered. A space to name pain. To release shame. To step into a new chapter, however quietly. So as we rest, we might imagine this: a stone dropped into water. A letter placed in flame. A breeze carrying old words away. Release, even now, is a kind of medicine.